Hi, everybody. This is Crypto Rich, working with you to get rich with crypto, filling our pockets with crypto profits. I have with me Tom Luongo of Gold, Goats and Gun and Alexander Mercouris of the-duran. And they are two of my favorite political and economic commentators. And we're going to be looking at the world today, including conversations about Europe, the US, cryptocurrencies, and money. Want to make money in crypto? This is Token Metrics. Token Metrics helps crypto investors build profitable portfolios using artificial intelligence-based crypto indices, trading indicators, rankings, and price predictions for more than 6,000 crypto assets. Affiliate link in the description below. Please watch out for comments from scammers purporting to be me or other crypto YouTubers asking you to contact them. Do not contact them. Hey, Tom. Hey, Alexander. Thank you so much for making yourself available. And
no problem, Rich. I appreciate the invite as always. Always a great chance to chat with Alex, who's one of my favorite analysts as well. So.
Yes. Thank you, Alexander. And I'm fortunate because I listen to all the stuff that you put out. And this is like, I just get to sit back on my sofa and then listen to my favorite commentators. This is great. So thank you very much. We're going to start with talking about what's happening in the world of money. Because you made a comment before we started recording, Alexander, about how you think that's going to be critical and shaping everything. And I can kind of see undercurrents actually of how it's shaping what's showing up on the surface. So do you want to start, Alexander, please?
Yes, right. There are two big stories going on in 2021. There's the geopolitical story, which is the one that I talk about mostly, which is that you see the Russians and the Chinese working increasingly together. You see the West. You see an attempt to consolidate things around the new administration in the West. That is the story that we see on the surface. What is really going on, the big overarching story, the one that we're going to see playing out more and more over the next couple of months, and the one which, with historical hindsight, I strongly suspect is going to be the important one, is that we're going to see a major crisis within the monetary and financial system. And the reason is because following the presidential election in the United States, it seems to me that all sense of restraint and even reality has gone away. What we're seeing now, to an increasing degree, is a sense of, from the central banks, from governments also, that you can spend and create money and use that money that you're creating in order to spend without any kind of restraint at all. So the Federal Reserve Board continues to create money and to depress interest rates in the middle of what it pretends is a recovery. The United States government runs a massive deficit, which to a great extent now the Federal Reserve Board is directly monetizing. And within the European Union, which is the other great pole of the West, the European Central Bank is going even further with all of this. They are now again running unrestrained financial money creation. And they're again now quite openly and straightforwardly monetizing spending by governments. So we are losing any connection any longer to underlying economic realities. Price signals are becoming increasingly distorted. In fact, they essentially, to all intents and purposes, broken down to the extent that they are giving off signals. Those signals are being ignored and disregarded. Now, this sort of thing happens at a moment when a political system, and I mean a big power system, is sensing that it is running out of time. You saw that in 3rd century Rome. You saw that in 16th century China, Ming China. You saw that in 18th century France. You saw that in the 1980s in the Soviet Union, when this is a misunderstood episode, where the Soviet government, sensing again that it was running out of road and running out of time, tried to accelerate the pace of the economy by out of control money creation, a program known in Russia at that time as acceleration, a fact which people don't know about. They talk about perestroika and glasnost, but the big slogan of the mid 1980s in the Soviet Union was acceleration. And we're seeing that in the West now as governments, the political system, elites, all of those people are saying to themselves, things are not going right. We're beginning to beginning to slip out of our hands. We push the accelerator down in the hope that this will generate economic growth, rapid economic growth, which will somehow help us to contain all our problems. Our legitimacy crisis, which is particularly strong in the United States, our general economic malaise, our geopolitical problems, which are intensifying, and what always and invariably happens when political elites turn to the printing machine, or in this case to the electronic money creating machine, in order to get themselves out of their problems, is that instead of resolving the problems, it accelerates a collapse which comes to be seen as inevitable. In fact, it is a symptom of what is an inevitable collapse.
Thank you, Tom.
Excellent, Alex. It's and to put a couple of finer points on this, Ludwig von Mises called this the crack-up boom.
Yes.
Like a priori, this is purely predictable through the application of logic and reason and good a priori assumptions about human action and human behavior. And I take I spend way too much of my time arguing with people who argue that praxeology is nonsense, and then I just say, well, you've misdefined all your terms, and this is why you think praxeology is nonsense. And even though here it is, right? But I'll get off my libertarian high horse in just a second. The truth of the matter is that not only is that acceleration happening, but I think it's happening for a reason. I don't think it's just desperation. I think there's desperation now. Like in the last month, the desperation has become real because Davos, who has been driving this policy of acceleration on purpose in order to affect, for lack of a better term, the big commie takeover, because you can't have a real communist revolution without destroying the middle class, without destroying the bourgeois. And how do you do that? You do that by destroying the pricing signals and the supply chains of basic commodities and upending the basic function of work for hire and all of the rest of it. And look at exactly what's happening since Biden was inaugurated. I refuse to use the word elected. Okay. It's a very clear pattern of economic vandalism, of breaking down our trust in the electrical grid. Texas, the pipeline infrastructure for energy, Colonial Pipeline, right? Shutting down Keystone, XL Pipeline, Line 5 coming in from Enbridge, that's been supplying oil to the entire Rust Belt, which is the manufacturing base of what's left of the manufacturing base of the United States. For 67 years, Gretchen Whitmer tried to shut that down. Enbridge just ignored her and kept pumping oil. Okay? And at the same time, you have an acceleration of states now standing up to the federal government and refusing money for unemployment benefits and immigration and all these things. We're starting to see governors stand up and go, we can't work with Washington. They're actively trying to destroy our people, and they're actively grinding their political axes in our backs. Greg Abbott has finally gotten religion down in Texas. We're going to build our own border wall. Biden won't build it. Ron DeSantis in Florida, thank God for Ron DeSantis, is the one showing the world that lockdowns don't work. Like, period. Like the entire Davos agenda of vaccine passports and all the rest of it's nonsense. It's just complete nonsense. This is an act of economic vandalism that is a project of economic vandalism. And what we have to wrap our heads around is how are we going to stop that? Alexander is exactly right that acceleration is the key because they know that the revolt against them is enormous. Here in the U.S., the goal, and I said this before the election, I said, it doesn't matter who wins. They will destroy the United States come hell or high water. They will go full scorched earth if Trump somehow squeaks through, or they will go scorched earth if Biden goes through. It doesn't matter, because in either way, the political situation in the United States divides to the point where it then secession and civil war are the only outcomes, and that serves Davos. Weakening the United States strengthens Europe by default. Okay, and you have to understand that's how they're thinking. They're thinking like this is China, Russia, Iran, the EU, the United States. And they've got control of the United States, and now they're destroying it in order to roll that capital up into the EU. That's what they're trying to do. They're going to fail, but that's what they're going to do.
All right, Tom. Listen, thank you. And how does this tie in to the European Union and how the European Union is just printing money like crazy? And actually, before that, they must know. I know, and I'm not financially, economically. You print money, it goes to pot. It destroys everything. We'll have protest and unrest and revolutions and poverty and hunger and angry people and rioting.
And they think that they can control that through the final unmooring of money from work. That's what you have to destroy the existing system. These people are vandals. They believe that the only way they can push humanity forward is by putting them through a meat grinder. I'm telling you, guys, if you've never read Watchmen by Alan Moore, these people read Watchmen, got to issue 11 and 12 and went, ooh, this is the handbook on how to destroy the world, as opposed to a warning about how you kill millions of people. They don't care. They have an open policy of culling the human race. Mark Carney just published a book talking about this. The former head of the Bank of Canada, who sold all their gold, and the Bank of England. I just read a great article on with excerpts from his book about how much of an ideologue Mark Carney is, and he's one of the basic, the lieutenants of this crowd, just like Tony Blair, just like David Cameron and Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and Pelosi and all the rest of them. It's all of them. Heaver, Hofstadt, it doesn't matter. They're all their lieutenants. So, you have to realize that this is an ideological thing with them. They are fully committed to sustainable human activity, which means activity they control 100%. And that we're going to be for. They believe this. And everybody better wrap their head around this real quick.
But Tom, we'll be happy. We'll own nothing and we'll be happy. They'll own everything and be even happier.
Or else.
Yeah. All right.
It's always, there are obviously definitely people, I think, who do things in that way. If I can say, there's a good example of a government in the past which deliberately created hyperinflation within its own society in order to annihilate middle classes. And that was Soviet Russia. There was a period of time just after the October Revolution when the Soviets were they were partly doing it in order to fund themselves through the Civil War, but they were also quite conscious that by printing money and by creating hyperinflation, that would eventually result in a destruction of the middle class. And one Soviet politician at the time actually said that the printing press is the machine gun that has obliterated the bourgeoisie. He actually said that. So that was his thing. But this is the interesting thing, of course, because once they did that, what they discovered is that it didn't actually increase their control. It was creating such a huge reaction that, on the contrary, what Lenin had to do, and he did it, by the way, very efficiently, was that he had to reverse that policy and restore a functioning financial system. And he brought back a gold-based currency. People overlook this. And there was a period of about 8 years when the Soviets actually ran a very conventional financial monetary system before they were able to again start a renewed offensive, but one that was carried out in a somewhat different way. So this, I think, points to the enormous danger of actually deliberately whipping up the collapse of money and hyperinflation. Because, of course, you may think it will help you in the sense that, of course, you annihilate the middle class, you annihilate property owners, you annihilate, in fact, property. But what will invariably happen is that will provoke such a huge reaction within society that if you try and proceed down that road, you will find yourself facing what the Bolsheviks called a counter-revolution. I should say one person who it isn't widely known was enormously impressed by the way in which Lenin stabilized the financial system in Russia was Keynes. He always pretended otherwise, but he learned an awful lot from all of that, and it did inform a lot of his future economic thinking. But to come back to our present situation, the ideologists often find that reality doesn't quite conform to what their expectations are.
And what's funny about this, and this is why I have such a hard time with people understanding this, but crypto is the counter revolution, because these people saw this happening, 15, 20 years ago with DigiCash first, and then, eventually with Bitcoin. And you can see that because the mindset's still there. The mindset is absolutely there. They understand that the money is you fix the money, you fix society. A corrupt money begets a corrupt society. A stable, a sound money or a moral money creates a moral society, and that's why the time of the international gold standard, while still tumultuous, but it was all localized wars. It wasn't world war. Once money started to become unmoored from gold, that's when we started fighting world wars. And now we're fighting a world war now, and that war has been hybridized into the financial system, and it's been going on and fought through proxies on the ground, which Alexander and I discuss every day. It's been going on now, in my mind, it's been going on since 2013, when the U.S., or even 2011, when they first started their campaign in Syria. As far as I'm concerned, World War III started with the first attempts to overthrow Assad in Syria, because it's led domino like all to where we are today. Now, so when you start to think about what's really happening and what's going on, it's very clear that they understand that, like all people who have tremendous power, they believe they're they believe they're the smartest people in the room, and that they're smarter than the room. And they believe this time that they can just form the switches over into digital currencies, which will give them the level of surveillance they never had before. Because they all keep saying the same thing. You've ever heard this before from leftists? Oh, well, the Soviet Union wasn't really communism. This or this wasn't really communism. Like Laos wasn't really communism, or this wasn't really communism. We can do it better. I'm like, really? How many more hundreds of millions of people do you need to kill in order to get this done? How many more hundreds of millions of lives do you have to materially make worse through disease and poor diet and poor health and this and that and all of these things? How many billions of people do you have to keep in abject poverty, living for under $1 a day in the third world through dollar diplomacy and dollar imperialism? In order to affect your perfect communism? They honestly do believe that they can get there through central bank digital currencies, because they'll have complete tax compliance, they'll have complete surveillance, they'll have all of these things. And they really do believe that. And I'm telling you that human beings just don't work that way. And they just don't, they don't allow that. They're just not going to allow that to happen. We're just too unruly that way. We get it. And we can see them coming. And they told us all this already. And now we're all like, no, 70% of Americans are not going to get vaccinated. Okay? 70% of Americans are not going to get vaccinated, no matter how much they try and make it such that we can't get a job. I'm like, okay, I can't get a job, then give me a UBI. And then I'll use the UBI, and also I'll run a small business underneath, I'll run a small business under the table. And we'll just turn this into, like, seriously? It's not going to work. It never has, it never will. Because the cost of administering and maintaining and enforcing the system is more expensive than the benefits accrued from the system. And it's incredibly extractive and capital consumptive. And ultimately, because of that, it has to fail. It could take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Like, Austrians are never right about time, but we are right about the end state.
Okay. So, is it like this, an overview? So they're destroying the currencies deliberately, in particular the dollar and the euro, to destroy the financial system, and at the same time bringing in central bank digital currencies and UBI, using apps that track and trace us all the time and everything, that they control our money, and then, like you said earlier, separate our labor from the value that it generates in the form of money.
Absolutely.
And then the Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are the escape route.
Yes. Absolutely. Christine Lagarde said that. She mentioned this I was just reading an article from a speech in Bloomberg from her back in January, where she said these crypto things are very, very dangerous because they're, funny business money and all of this stuff. And she said, and we have to realize that if there's an escape route, people will use it and they will escape us. Like, she talked with her outside voice, for Christ's sake. Like, you're not supposed to say this in public, but that's how desperate. That speaks to what Alex was talking about with led the program with. That they're at that point where they're so worried about losing potency and losing control. They're now saying what they in front of us what they've always said behind closed doors. There's no now they're hoping that they can foment enough of a crisis that everybody can go and scare people, and that the escape routes are worse than what they've got planned for us. That's their only play left, and it's just it's a kind of desperation that is palpable. And for anybody who's even remotely skilled at reading this stuff, understands exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and I get it about this, and I'll come to you in a second, Alexander, about the escapes route being much worse because Bitcoin is so terrible for the environment. Unlike printing money in order to destroy whole economies and bomb people across the other side of the world, that's very environmentally friendly, apparently. Alexander.
Well, I mean, the other thing, of course, that all this is doing is that it is making people very, very, very concerned, and not just, people that up to now had been very resistant to challenging orthodoxies, narratives that we were being sort of pushed down. But people are beginning to experience increasingly stresses in their lives. People are complaining all the time about inflation. I'm sure you come across this yourself, Tom and Rich. People are starting to talk about this, and when that starts to happen, when it affects people's everyday lives in that kind of way, they start to challenge everything, because the foundation of any system of legitimacy, the foundation of legitimacy for any economic and political system is trust in its money, in its fundamental financial integrity. Once that is gone, all is lost, and that is an extremely difficult, important point, which I think some people don't perhaps fully understand. What's absolutely remarkable to me, by the way, and it's something I find very extraordinary, is the way in which you already start to see all sorts of people who up to now were very, very, very critical of our type of thinking, beginning suddenly to become much more open to it.
The shift is happening. I went to the Bitcoin 2021 conference down in Miami, and I kept remarking to my friend and partner in the newsletter who I went with. We went as for business reasons, obviously, to see what was going on. And I can tell you that I kept saying to him over and over and over again, in all of my life, I would never have ever in my wildest imagination thought that I would be at a conference this big, this well attended, and this hip to the real issues with this many people, and from government, the mayor of Miami, to the private sector, to finance and Wall Street veterans and professionals, to people on the streets you would never expect. You look and go, that's not a Bitcoiner. That's not a Bitcoiner. That hot chick's not a Bitcoiner. What are we doing here? And to see that and understand that they're all cheering at the same thing, which is my keys, my money, stay off my property. Okay? That was the ethos, and Bitcoin and the moral case for Bitcoin. That was the ethos. It doesn't matter whether Bitcoin succeeds, beats the Davos crowd or not in the next 5 to 7 years, which is going to be the big thing. That's not important. What's important is the mindset. What's important is that 10 years ago, I was this weirdo. Today, there's 50,000 people took over the city of Miami. And the city of Miami is talking about mining, putting on their treasury, doing what El Salvador did, making a legal tender locally, yada, yada, yada. And if you think that it's happening in Miami, you know that it's happening. It's being discussed in Tallahassee, right? These things are important functionally because the mindset is this is a different thing that we've would have imagined. And I can tell you that I don't feel as radical as I did 5 years ago. I actually don't feel radical enough anymore.
I know exactly what you mean, by the way.
Liberal,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
people are.
I'm a shitlib. I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, of course, people do notice things. I mean, they do notice the fact that the Russiagate narrative has suddenly been switched off. They do notice the things that the Wuhan lab story has changed. I mean, whatever they may think about the truth or not of it, they say to themselves, "Well, what actually happened? Why is something that we weren't allowed to talk about before suddenly become acceptable to talk about?" I mean, but people do notice these things, and it does cumulatively have an effect, and we can see it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's that effect is multiplying. It's multiplying quickly. It's like mushrooms after a rainstorm in account fields. And it's fertile ground at that point. And I use that metaphor all the time. What's that?
One manifestation of that multiplication is what's happening in El Salvador.
Exactly.
Bitcoin's going to be legal tender.
Yeah, the legal tender angle with El Salvador, and I don't know if you guys watched the entire panel from there or not, but it was handled. It was led into by the CEO of Strike, which is a Lightning Network, wallet provider and service provider. And he was the one. He said, "I'm the one who helped write the damn law. I'm the one who interfaced with the El Salvadorian president, Bukele. I'm the one who we did all this. We, the crypto community, educated him about this and went through the process. So this is not just this man making a decision out of the blue. This is 2 years worth of work to lead up to this point." And one of the points that I think I made I didn't make an article recently, but another point to think about this is that you can't get to this point for a country like El Salvador, which is absolutely a victim of U.S. dollar imperialism, right? You can't get them to that point if the Bitcoin's slow, boring, old technology blockchain didn't have a second layer payment processor on top of it that could normalize transaction fees based on the local that was normalized to the local economy. And that's what Lightning Networks promises to the El Salvadors and the Venezuelas and the Nigerias. I'm hearing more and more stories all across Africa, Central and South America about this happening. And now that that's there, it doesn't matter that there may be like other crypto solutions that are better than this. That's irrelevant. I'm not having that conversation because the big daddy has something now. Whether Lightning Network is the right solution or not is irrelevant. It's about getting the next billion people online because Davos can only control the United States and Europe. But there are 3 billion people in this world that are unbanked. Okay. But they all have a smartphone because smartphones are $29. Okay. And like it or not, that's the world. And what's going to happen to financial services in the third world is the same thing that happened in cell phones. They never laid any copper. There are no landlines in Africa. Well, there are a few, but they don't have landline infrastructure like we have in the United States or you guys have in Europe. They bypass that. They just put up cell towers. And now that they have cell towers, they have Wi-Fi networks. And they have 3G, and they're going to go from 3G to 4G to 5G very quickly because the cost of deployment goes down as the technology becomes adopted more widespread. So therefore, these people are going to have access to financial tools and the ability to coordinate capital through time, and they're going to get there very fast. And Davos has no solution for this other than destroy the first world as quickly as possible, go for MMT as quickly as possible. And as far as I'm concerned, that's before November of 2022. When the midterm elections happen, because they're going to lose power.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, this is their window.
I completely agree. I think 2022 is an enormously important end date. You have to understand some of the feverish quality of what's happening as an attempt to do things before that end date comes. And when I talked about acceleration and throwing away restraints and acting in the most extraordinary way, ramming the accelerator down ever harder, however many bumps in the road appear, it's partly because they're very, very worried about this end date that's coming. And it's a hard date. You can't do very much to shift it. You can shift all sorts of things, but to actually shift 2022 would be, well, it would be a revolutionary event to try and do it. And I think that there comes a point where the inner restraints start to grow. Can I just quickly say, Tom, about what you said about mobile phones and all the rest? You're absolutely right, and I witnessed it. And the place I witnessed it was in Moscow, in Russia, in fact, because of course, under the Soviets, people don't know this. Moscow had landlines. People in Moscow tended to have landlines that the rest of Russia didn't. It was very, very confined to a few places. And in fact, if you wanted to speak to people on the phone, you had to go to a phone booth. And there were a few places in the cities where you could find a phone booth, or to a post office, and you could pay. And it was easy to keep an ear for people to hear what you were saying, because that was partly the reason it didn't happen. So I mean, there was that side. But what has happened is, with the mobile phone revolution, everybody in Russia suddenly is connected to a phone, and it has transformed the political and social conversation in Russia in a way that people outside the country simply do not appreciate. It's made it suddenly completely different. And of course, the other thing is, because of the fact that they didn't have landlines, they didn't have landlines based on copper wire. They could put things with fiber optics, which is one reason why. Believe me, if you think internet is fast in Europe, you haven't. If you go to Russia, it's in Moscow especially, it's on a different scale. I mean, I think I've experienced it.
And the United States is backwards when it comes to
it's backwards.
We have some of the worst bandwidth in the world. I mean,
it's absolutely.
And so much of it is a holdover of the old Ma Bell stuff, and we could do 2 hours on my criticism of how internet and cable law and John McCain and all the rest of it have destroyed the ability for us to actually get anything, to get decent coverage. Why my picture is terrible this morning. This is the reason I'm going to have 5G at my house before I have a decent land connection, unless I'm going to spend $1,000 a month to bring a fiber line across county lines.
I know.
Because it's a county line between me and decent bandwidth.
Okay, but coming very quickly to the point that you were making about Russia has e-banks. I mean, it's all happening there.
It is
in ways that just as you said has happened in Africa. You can actually go there. You can see it.
I know,
and of course, because they got the technical knowledge and the mathematical skills, it's coming incredibly fast.
Yep, and hopefully the price of oil will stay under $100 a barrel, so that investment in Russia's infrastructure continues, and the money doesn't all get sucked into the oil and gas.
You're absolutely right, and by the way, something again people don't understand in the West. They are very worried about it. They do not want oil to rise higher than it has. $70 a barrel, as far as they're concerned, is about as high as they want it to go. Ideally, in fact, at this time, they would like it a bit lower.
Yeah, they would like it around $60
higher in Russia, Alexander.
Sorry?
Why don't they want it higher? Because it would
because if oil prices rise, then investment goes into the oil and gas and energy industries rather than into the more productive sides of the economy. So they actually want oil and gas prices to remain lower rather than higher. It also has another effect, is the sense that if oil prices rise too fast, then of course the ruble appreciates, and that's good in some ways because it lowers inflation to some extent. Again, overpricing the ruble makes the other parts of the economy less competitive. So they would much rather see a lower oil price. And a further point which Putin has made, and he's made it many times, is that a very, very high oil price invariably leads eventually to an oil price crash. And it creates instability in the economic system, which of course, again, they don't want to see. So
commodity prices are cured in one of two ways. The cure for low prices is low prices. The cure for high prices is high prices, because the commodity investment cycle is out of phase with the production cycle. The investment in exploration and the long lead time. Okay, think of them as sine waves. They are out of phase with each other. Yeah. So, you have to realize it. And it's the same thing in agriculture. It's the same thing in whether it's, it's the same thing in almost all commodity production. And I've been studying commodity production for 20 years now. And it's just very clear. So what Putin is asking for is stable oil prices, and basically put oil on, make oil companies effectively bond investments at paying between 5 and 7%. That's what he wants, and he wants that for the world, not just because it keeps Gazprom and Rosneft, it keeps the Russian state coffers full. That's the cynical side of it. But the other side of it is that it also gives the rest of the world stability as to how they can price their energy, which is the base layer of the entire economy. The economy doesn't run without stable energy prices, and so instability in energy prices creates global instability, politically, economically, and everything else. And the people who are most vulnerable to the fluctuations in the price of oil, and therefore the fluctuations in the price of money, are the people who get that money last. The people who are furthest away from the centers of power: Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, Central and South America. Which is why those bitches in Davos and in Washington continue to do this, and they're desperate now to roll everything up into the IMF and the UN. That's what they want. Ultimately, they don't even want the EU. Like, the EU is just a stepping stone to global government. You do realize that that's their goal. It's very clear what they're talking about. Macron last week coming out to see what Macron did last week when he said the G7 should sell $100 billion worth of gold in order to bail out Africa for the coronavirus, which is nonsense. They want to sell $100 billion worth of gold to the IMF to issue SDRs so they can issue loans to Africa, because Africa is quickly cryptoizing. It's quickly they're being outcompeted by Russian and Chinese investment in Africa because it's all about the rush for rare earths, because you can't electrify everything without the rare earths and the lithium. You just can't do it.
No.
So and they know all of this. And so this is what Macron, and that kills like 12 birds with one stone. Okay. I'm going to write an public article about that this week to let you know, because I've already written the notebook version of that for my patrons, because it's very clear to me why Macron was doing this.
Yeah, I'm going to have links to the duran.com and also Tom's site in the description below if you want to go and check out their sites, and I do recommend you do so. Now let's talk about the G7, because I think at the time of recording, it's almost at an end, the G7 summit in Cornwall, and I noticed how careful they were being with each other to socially distance, wear masks, unless of course it was actually taking place in Florida and we weren't told, because us poor saps in the UK, we have to carry on remaining locked down forever, it looks. Alexander, do you want to speak about what you noticed in the G7, what's coming out of it that you think is going to be critical?
The interesting thing for me about the G7 is that ultimately it's become incredibly uninteresting. I don't really think any of the major decisions